The pain in my stomach was unbearable. I tried to stay calm, but my weight and belly pressure made breathing difficult. Just as I was ready to gasp for air, I felt a powerful kick. It wasn't the baby, it was him. My husband kicked me with such terrifying intensity that I felt the pain go through my body. I could not make out what was happening. The man I married and the father of my unborn kid just kicked my pregnant belly. Panic took hold of me as I sought to figure out why. Hello there, I'm 30 years old and go by Madeline. After leaving the nation, I attended college in Denver and subsequently obtained employment there. After 2 years of marriage to Jake, we are expecting our first kid in 2 years. When I first met Jake at work, he was the son of the president of one of our customers. Jake's older brother lives with them. Ryan is a renowned and successful senior executive within the company. Ryan's potential as the next president has been the subject of rumors. Jake is a senior executive who has worked with the company for a long time and plans to stay there, even though he is not the boss. First of all, I never understood why someone like Jake would be attracted to me, but we started dating once I became more accepting of him. He was amiable and kind, and his family's business was well established and steady. I decided to marry Jake since I was becoming more and more attracted to him. Following our union, I resigned from my job because of what my mother-in-law said. Caroline. She stated that after marriage, women naturally prioritize their families. In addition, the mother must raise the child until they turn 3. My attitude toward staying at home to raise our baby was always open, so when I found out I was pregnant, I didn't struggle against quitting my job. Caroline was ecstatic, but she also noted quickly that my sister-in-law Lindsay was still working after having children. It is disgraceful to send kids to preschool while their mother works. That makes our family appear really bad. She'd say it each time we visited Caroline. Jake would often agree with his mother and reiterate her complaints. Hearing people speak so poorly of Lindsay when she disparaged her was strange and unpleasant. I didn't say anything, though, so as not to cause any trouble. Unfortunately, my silence confirmed their claims, fueling the rumors. Despite Jake's occasionally harsh behavior toward me, time continued to pass. At least, I began to think I had it better than Lindsay. I found it simpler to take Caroline's and Jake's growing criticism and expectations after coming to that knowledge. Over time, my pregnancy progressed, and at my last appointment, I was 9 months along. We found out we were expecting a girl, and everything seemed to be going as planned. I told Jake straight away because I was so excited, but he didn't seem all that interested. Maybe men have a harder time bonding with their unborn child before they are born. I tried not to think about it. We rang in the new year by gathering as a large family at Jake's parents' house, as was customary. Even Jake's brother Ryan and his wife Lindsay, who came in frequently, brought their kids. Toast to a successful new year. Madeleine, how are you feeling? Lindsay asked when we arrived before I could answer. With a sudden shift in tone, Jake said, "She's fine. Delete it from your thoughts." He fake smiled at Lindsay and turned to walk away without saying hi. As soon as I stepped inside the house, Caroline pulled me aside. "Madeline, I've been waiting for you." Being alone and unable to communicate has been really isolating. Despite her positive tone, her remarks contained criticism. Lindsay was right there, but she didn't seem to be registered by Caroline. I tried to seem calm, so I nodded and grinned politely. As the evening dragged on, the family gathered for dinner. Caroline. I was in the kitchen with Lindsay, preparing dinner for everyone. Jake's father was one of the about 15 relatives present. Richard and his siblings were gathered in the living room, where Jake was loudly toasting and boasting about his accomplishments. I could hear him over everyone else as he talked about how excellent things were going at work and how Madeline was listening to Mom and me. Thus, having a wonderful wife enriches life. It was not a title of honor. I could see it. It was a dig at Ryan and Lindsay. I didn't say anything, but my stomach was becoming irritated with all of this running around. Lindsay noticed first, "Madeline, you've been stroking your belly a lot. How are things going in your life?" she asked, her voice full of concern. Before I could even respond, Caroline ended the call. "Indeed, you should sleep for a while. If you were in pain, we wouldn't want anything to happen to you." I caressed my belly and took a seat in a chair in the room next to the living room, trying to relax. I could hear Ryan talking to me from across the room as he was feeding Ian, Lindsay's son. "Are you feeling well, Madeline?" he asked. "Thank you at this point. Your health is incredibly important," I responded, and we talked about parenting and what to expect when the baby is born for a few minutes. Ryan told a number of moving and insightful stories about Ethan. It was clear that he was a loving father. "Do you know what gender your baby is?" he asked. "Yes, it is a girl." I smiled and said, "Then I'll be magnificent." Ryan responded politely, but I could see Jake's mood shift from across the room. He abruptly stood up, his face twisted in frustration. Despite my assumption that he might be heading to the bathroom, he approached me directly. An expression of coldness filled his gaze. "For what cause are you sitting down?" He reacted and gave me a look when I inquired. Suddenly perplexed. Jake kicked me in the stomach. It wasn't a very powerful kick, but it was enough to make me gasp and cringe. I clutched my stomach right away, stunned by what he'd done. Anxiety pounded in my heart not just for myself, but also for my child. "What do you do with your time?" A sense of incredulity and rage filled the room as Jake Ryan finally raised his voice. Jake shrugged, unfazed, and stated, "Wives should always stand." "Why is she talking while Mom is seated here working?" Ryan continued, his voice growing stern. "That's over the top. This has to stop." But Jake smiled smugly, brushing aside his brother's concerns. "What influences the outcome? Inside is a single female. She'll eventually move out and get married. She won't even help the company in any way." A relative's voice could be heard from across the room. "Hey, that's going too far, Jake." Jake laughed enthusiastically, oblivious to the growing tension in the room. "I've decided not to follow in the footsteps of those husbands who spoil their wives. It's my job to correct my wife if she's being negligent," he stated with a cozy smile. I just stood there clutching my stomach, unable to move. With a laugh, Jake turned to leave. How could such words be said by the man I married? I was stunned by what had happened. It was more than just bodily discomfort. My stomach hurt. It hurt and deceived me to know that he cared more about winning his mother's approval than for me or our unborn child. But after that, something unexpected happened. Richard, Jake's father, who had been silently watching the proceedings, suddenly stood up. He crossed the room with a serious expression on his face. Everyone became hushed as they saw him walk up to Jake and complete what Jake had started. Richard kicked Jake hard in the leg, causing him to stumble. The whole room exploded in shock. "You don't have a child inside of you, therefore I'm sure everything will be okay," Richard said coldly. "And when a child does anything wrong, it is the father's duty to correct him." Grabbing Jake by the collar, he drew him in closer. "Please unwind, Dad." Declaring this, Ryan stepped in to stop his father from hurting anyone more. Casting a scathing glance at his youngest child, Richard declared, "It's not worth it." "Ryan, are you not upset? He's been talking down to you all along." Ryan only gave a small grunt and shook his head. "No, I'm not enraged. I really apologize for him." Jake spit, flushed with anger and humiliation. "True enough," Ryan sighed. "You've been so focused on running for president that you've forgotten what matters most, family. If keeping the title matters to you, I'm happy with my life." Jake's expression conveyed his embarrassment at Ryan's comments. He opened his mouth to say something, but nothing came out. He looked around the room and saw the disapproving movements of the other family members. It was as though the reality of the situation had finally dawned on him. "That's adequate," Lindsay said. Saying thank you for defending Ryan, she moved in to defuse the heated moment with Richard. She turned to face Jake and said, "You have to apologize to everyone." Richard gave a curt nod, his gaze fixed on his kid. "It is true indeed. You owe everyone in this room something. Madeline in particular, I apologize." Clearly afraid, Jake cast a quick glance at the ground. He approached me at a slow pace. I instantly covered my stomach, thinking he would lash out again. Rather, Jake bowed before me and said words in a shaky, rough voice. He gazed down at my stomach, his eyes full with regret, and said, "I'm sorry I was wrong. I truly apologize for having the baby. I shouldn't have done that." Caroline stood up in his wake, her face pallid. "Lindsay, I'm sorry. I whispered terrible things about you and Madeline, and I've been too hard on you. Please forgive me." Lindsay gave a small, reassuring smile. "Everything is well. Caroline, you should be apologizing to Madeline. The baby doesn't deserve to hear these things, and she has been under a lot of stress." Caroline looked up at me and gave me a nod. "I'm sorry, Madeline, for treating you badly. I had no idea what to say." I couldn't ignore what had happened, even though it was uncomfortable to hear Jake and Caroline express genuine regrets. I could nod a little, but I knew in my heart that nothing would ever be the same again. Richard, though, was unimpressed. "Jake, Caroline, I think it's time for you two to part ways. Right now, I don't want to see any of you." His forceful voice allowed no room for discussion. Jake and Caroline left the room very carefully, seeming unhappy. A distinct silence followed them. At last, a relative spoke up, trying to diffuse the tension. "Madeline, Lindsay, move quickly. Please come over and join us for dinner." I had never smiled so sweetly in the evening before. I felt a wave of relief. Lindsay and I seated the rest of the family surrounding us. I was at last able to find some peace. Richard's hatred for Jake didn't end with that night. Jake's dreams of becoming president were swiftly crushed, and he was permanently excluded from the family home. Although he remained an employee of the corporation, he was no longer eligible for advancement. He was stuck in his position, a far cry from the CEO role he had anticipated for himself. I will not allow Jake to continue kicking me while I was pregnant. I suggested ending things. He promised to change his ways, showed deep regret, and resolved never to drink alcohol again. I wasn't sure Jake didn't have other options, though. He consequently kept working for the company, subsisting on takeout and showering at a nearby gym. Jake eventually started to feel the pressure of his new life. He lost a significant amount of weight in less than a month, but he continued to work hard and stay in touch with me. "Do you require anything at all? What state are you in physically?" By asking in texts, he would gradually weaken my resistance to my better judgment. I eventually allowed Jake to return home. Following his return, once again, Jake expressed regret, but oddly, it seemed like a different Jake. He even started volunteering help around the house when needed, and he stopped whining about cleaning. "Madeline," he would constantly say, especially as my pregnancy grew longer and my range of motion grew less. Richard finally observed Jake's changes and let him go back to the family house. And Caroline had calmed down a great deal and quit berating Lindsay. After what happened that night, everyone seemed to have changed. For my family, I want to work hard right now. I'd never heard Jake speak with such sincerity before, but he did it often. Nevertheless, I will never be able to fully forgive him for what he did, not just for the business. Jake's newfound sense of responsibility and empathy makes me believe that people can change. I believe that our child will be able to join us in a better, more peaceful,